I'll answer kind of a cousin question, if that's all right. I mean, I think the heart of the question is something about evolving monetization structures and monetization models, and it's been interesting to see some evolution there on the consumer side. I don't know if the analogy holds over on the enterprise side, but on the consumer side, certainly I personally am a believer in kind of a multiplicity of successful monetization models, and I think we're seeing that more over the last couple of years. If you look back, I don't know, 3 years ago, there were some people, not all, but some people who were saying, look, we're going more and more towards, on the consumer side again, advertising as the answer. Kind of that's how one does things on the consumer internet side, because there's lots of people that you can get, and customer acquisition could be relatively cheap. So that's kind of the optimal solution. And I think we've seen that become less the case in the last couple of years. We see in certain kinds of companies and with certain kinds of products, you see very successful freemium models. I think subscriptions, which were, according to some commentators, given up for dead, a few years ago, are doing very well for certain kinds of companies. Virtual goods, which I have heard esteemed VCs laugh at in the past, not certainly anyone in the present company, are thriving, are booming, exploding, not just in Asia where they've been big for a couple of years, but here in the US as well. So there are many paths to successful monetization, and what's appropriate depends on your customer base and your product and the nature of your business. But personally, again, on the consumer side at least, there are lots of possibilities there.
But even on the enterprise side, I would say the same thing. One of the things, if you're thinking about this very problem in the company that you are building or the company that you're in today, one of the things you have to look at is flexibility in your model. The technology around it, or how we use the different services or applications, is going to evolve. It's inevitable. It's going to evolve. Case in point, look at Oracle's database product, right? It was licensed against processors. What happens when virtualization comes on the scene? All of a sudden, processors take a whole new meaning, virtual versus physical. So how do you effectively change your licensing? And they really struggled with that for some period of time. Now, granted, we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar organization, but still, I think that flexibility is going to be paramount, so that even if you're moving from subscription or perpetual licensing to a service-based licensing, which is yet a third component to the matrix, how do you evolve that? And how do you evolve it in such a way that your customers don't start gaming it, where they start figuring out how to leverage the different models as it serves them best for the different situations. But having that flexibility is going to be important moving forward.
So in this landscape that we're talking about, then, what is the value of intellectual property?
Well, okay, who should ask that one?
Okay. Well, on the patents, so there's intellectual property in software. I'll let you guys talk about that. But in the patent side, it's really interesting when you look in the patent world, that most people don't realize that what a patent allows you to do is exclude other people from practicing your invention. It's an exclusionary right. It doesn't even give you the right to use your invention, because your invention might actually infringe someone else's patent, because there may be some component there. So it's an exclusionary right. The only thing you can do with a patent is sue someone for infringement and get a reasonable royalty for past infringement, and possibly an injunction stopping them infringing in future. So that is all a patent is. So you see the people in the patent business, that's what they do. So they buy patents and they assert them and they extract license fees, but they have to have this threat of litigation. Otherwise, if you don't, one thing that we're seeing in our business right now, and this seems to be common across all the brokers that we're talking to. If you have a patent and a technology, you go to a potential licensee and you say, would you like to license our technology and our patent? They say, well, are you going to sue us if we won't? And if you say no, they say, okay, well, we'll see you later. And that's it. So you know, these guys think, well, we got to sue them, otherwise, you know, they can't pay us. So, so that's really, intellectual property strategies are really driven by that litigation, and it sounds kind of sinister, but that's the core of the game. And then, of course, around that, you get people providing defensive strategies. We were talking about companies offering kind of a protection for large corporations, and they pool their funding. And so there are different strategies around that. But the core of the patent world, IP, is all litigation. And if you have patents that are not being infringed, they're very usually worthless. It's only when they're infringed that they actually become valuable.
You know, Mark White, to my right, who joined us a little bit ago, is a partner and founder in Whiteboard, and he's got some interesting perspectives to share about that point.
Well, taking off on what David had to say, I think what's really valuable is revenue, and intellectual property is a way to protect revenue and to sort of measure revenue. So I'm a corporate lawyer as well. I live in the transactional world, and in financings and in mergers and acquisitions, intellectual property is important not for its own intrinsic value, but how it relates to generating revenue for that enterprise. And so for a company that has patents, what that shows is others can't infringe on that right to generate revenue. And if it's not there, then there's some question about how long a company can generate revenue. It's on the current path that it's on. And so really, I think what investors tend to do and buyers of companies is they require patent protection. Trademark is important for all the branding discussion that we had earlier this afternoon. But it all relates to how it protects or helps propel revenue generation. That's my view.
Yeah, just on that, with the startup companies, if you have a good patent portfolio and you want to assert it, it's going to cost you about $5 million in legal fees to bring a lawsuit against a major infringer. Now, that $5 million precludes most small startup companies from doing that. So they're sitting on these assets that they can't assert themselves. So in many cases, there's situations where they could sell those patents to someone else that's going to assert them on their behalf, get some revenue into the company, get a license back to the company. It's kind of a win-win situation. They're sitting on patents they can't assert themselves, and they could generate some revenue from it and have the patents asserted against the infringers. So there are a lot of issues, strategic issues for startups around just the costs of actually asserting.
Thanks.
I'll throw out sorry. Go ahead. The caveat is that this is far from my area of expertise, so I'm speaking as a decided layman here. But from my experience in speaking with entrepreneurs, speaking with startups, and being on the other side of the table, if we're thinking about doing some sort of partnership or doing some sort of deal, I've seen many cases in which the value of a patent is overestimated by the startup or the entrepreneur. They think that their patent portfolio, or they speak as if it's more valuable than we might assess it being. Personally, and I can only speak for myself here, but personally, in the vast majority of cases, it would only be tremendously meaningful, almost as a piece of insurance to show that you're not going to be getting in trouble from some other person who's going to assert a claim against you. But as a positive asset, in terms of, say, generating revenue, from our perspective, in most cases, the value is not that high.
So on that, I'll just give you an example. We get to speak to lots of entrepreneurs that have patents, and many of them are living in another world when it comes to what they think these are worth. I'll just give you, our world record was, we had one entrepreneur that contacted us that had a patent for a folding deck chair, where the umbrella actually folded into the chair, and single patent, and he was convinced it was worth $10 billion. It could have been, right?